I remember the exact moment my 6-year-old daughter lifted her tiny hand in the middle of her father's wedding. The officiant had just smiled warmly and asked the question everyone expects, but no one ever answers. "Does anyone object to this marriage?" Most people glanced around the room with polite amusement. A few chuckled. My former mother-in-law later told me everyone assumed it was simply part of the ceremony. Then Lily stood. Her little white flower girl dress brushed against the polished wooden floor of the Vineyard Chapel, overlooking the rolling hills of Napa Valley. Her bouquet slipped from her fingers. My ex-husband Daniel leaned toward her with the smile people wear when they're trying not to lose their temper. "Sweetheart," he whispered loud enough for the front rows to hear, "Put your hand down." She didn't. Instead, she looked straight at the officiant. "I have something to say." Every guest froze. Some smiled nervously. Others reached for their phones. Daniel's bride Vanessa suddenly looked as pale as the roses decorating the altar. Halfway around the world, I knew none of this was happening. At that very moment, I was sitting in a small apartment in Singapore helping our 8-year-old son Ethan finish his math homework. The phone on my kitchen counter began vibrating. It was Daniel's mother. When I answered, all I heard was crying. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. "Lily just stopped the wedding. People often ask when my marriage ended. They assume it happened the day the judge signed our divorce papers. They're wrong. Our marriage ended years earlier, one ordinary Tuesday evening in Seattle, when I realized my husband had become someone who hurried through dinner just to answer another text message. Daniel wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He never yelled. He never broke furniture. He simply disappeared while sitting 3 feet away. For 20 years, we built what looked like a comfortable American life. We bought a modest 2-story home outside Seattle. We worked hard. We paid our bills. We raised 2 beautiful children. I believed we were ordinary. Now I think ordinary is sometimes where loneliness hides best. I worked as a senior project manager for a medical technology company. Daniel managed regional sales for a software firm. Our schedules were demanding, but for years we made them work. Until Vanessa arrived. According to Daniel, she was just the new marketing director. She traveled with his team, stayed late for meetings, shared flights, shared hotel conferences, shared inside jokes I no longer understood. When I asked questions, Daniel sighed. "You've become suspicious of everything." Maybe I had. Women my age don't suddenly become suspicious for no reason. We notice patterns. We notice silence. We notice when a husband smiles more at his phone than at his wife. Still, I kept hoping I was wrong. Hope can survive long after trust dies. The truth arrived on an ordinary Friday. I wasn't searching through Daniel's things. I was simply looking for a warranty receipt inside the desk drawer where we kept household paperwork. Instead, I found a small velvet jewelry box. Inside sat an elegant diamond necklace. Not my style. Not my birthday. Not our anniversary. Tucked underneath was a receipt. For Vanessa. No explanation was necessary. When Daniel came home that evening, I placed the receipt on the kitchen table. He stared at it. Then he looked at me. Neither of us spoke for what felt like an entire lifetime. Finally, he exhaled. "I wasn't going to tell you like this." That sentence hurt even more than the affair. Not because he admitted cheating, because he'd already decided there would be another way. Another time. Another plan. One that didn't include honesty. The divorce itself lasted nearly 11 months. Our attorneys were respectful. The judge was patient. No dramatic shouting. No courtroom surprises. Just paperwork dividing 20 years into columns labeled Assets, Liabilities, Custody. Those words looked so cold, printed in black ink. Nothing about them captured birthdays, family vacations, holding hands during hospital visits, Christmas mornings, the first house we painted together. Our children became legal arrangements instead of little hearts. That nearly broke me. The hardest fight wasn't over money. It was over Lily. Daniel insisted she should stay with him. His attorney argued that Lily's school friends, pediatrician, and grandparents were all in Washington. Meanwhile, my company had offered me a leadership position in Singapore overseeing a new international project. The assignment would last 3 years. It also included access to one of the best pediatric respiratory clinics in Asia. Our son Ethan had struggled with severe asthma since he was 3. His pulmonologist believed the opportunity could genuinely improve his quality of life. Daniel surprised everyone by agreeing Ethan should go with me. Then he insisted Lily remain with him. His lawyer framed it as preserving stability. My attorney warned me that fighting further could stretch the custody battle another year. Lily was already frightened enough. The judge approved split custody. I've signed thousands of business documents during my career. None weighed as much as signing those final custody papers. 30 minutes after the divorce became official, Ethan and I boarded a flight to Singapore. People probably thought I looked excited. International promotion. Fresh start. Adventure. Inside, I felt like I was leaving half my heart behind. Before boarding, Lily wrapped both arms around my waist. She was only 6, her cheek pressed against my coat. "Mommy." "Yes, sweetheart." "When will you come home?" I knelt until we were eye to eye. "I'll come every chance I get, and you'll visit me too." "What if I miss you before then?" I smiled because mothers sometimes lie for love. "You call me." "What if you're sleeping?" "I'll wake up." "What if you're working?" "I'll answer." "What if you're on an airplane?" "I'll call the minute I land." She studied my face as only children can. Then she asked the question I still hear in quiet moments. "Will I still be your little girl if you're far away?" I kissed her forehead. "There isn't an ocean big enough to change that." She nodded, then whispered something I'll never forget. "I'll keep your hugs safe." Singapore was beautiful. Clean streets, kind neighbors, warm evenings. Ethan slowly grew healthier. For that blessing alone, I remain grateful. But every evening ended the same way. Video calls. Sometimes Lily laughed. Sometimes she showed me drawings. Sometimes she wanted Ethan to tell her about school. Then little by little she changed. She smiled less, answered with one-word replies, looked over her shoulder before speaking. One evening I asked, "Everything okay at Daddy's house?" She nodded too quickly. "Uh-huh. You know you can tell me anything." Another nod. Behind her I heard Vanessa's voice. "Lily, stand up straight." Lily immediately adjusted herself. "I have to go." The screen went black. Weeks later, Daniel called. "I'm getting married." "So soon?" "When you know, you know." I almost laughed. After 20 years together, apparently forever had become 6 weeks. Then he added something that made my stomach tighten. "Lily's going to be our flower girl." Before I could answer, he continued, "It'll be good for her." Maybe he believed that. Or maybe he simply wanted every photograph to tell the story of one happy blended family. A few nights later, Lily finally whispered the words that kept me awake until dawn. "Mommy, I'm here. Daddy says I have a very important job at the wedding. I'm sure you'll do fine." A long silence. Then, barely louder than breathing, she said, "But I don't want to." I closed my eyes. Thousands of miles separated us. For the first time in my life, being her mother didn't feel like enough. By the time Lily admitted she didn't want to be the flower girl, I had already learned something painful about motherhood. Distance changes everything except worry. No matter how many video calls we shared, I couldn't smooth her hair before school. I couldn't tell whether she had eaten breakfast. I couldn't see the little expressions that tell a mother something is wrong before a child has the words to explain it. All I had were screens, and sometimes even screens can lie. The next morning I called Daniel. "I think Lily's struggling with the wedding." He sounded impatient before I even finished the sentence. "She's fine. She told me she doesn't want to be the flower girl. She's 6, Emma. 6-year-olds don't know what they want half the time. I think she knows how she feels." There was a pause. Then his voice became colder. "You always overreact." I had heard those words countless times during our marriage. Funny how they sounded exactly the same after the divorce. "I'm not trying to argue," I said quietly. "I'm asking you to listen to her." "I am listening." "No, Daniel, you're listening for agreement." He sighed. "I've got a meeting." The call ended. That was Daniel's favorite way to end difficult conversations. Not with anger, not with resolution. Simply by deciding they were over. A few days later, Lily called while Daniel was at work. She sat on the edge of her bed wearing little pink pajamas covered in stars. "Mommy, look." She held up a pair of shiny white shoes. "They're pretty," I said. "They hurt." My heart sank. "They're for the wedding." She slipped one on. "I have to practice walking." "Practice?" She nodded. "Miss Vanessa says I have to smile all the time." She tried to smile. It wasn't a child's smile. It looked like someone trying to remember the instructions. "Show me." She stood in front of the phone. One step. Another. Hands folded. Smile. Stop. Turn. Smile again. Even through the screen, I could tell she had repeated this dozens of times. "What happens if you stop smiling?" I asked. She looked toward the bedroom door before answering. "Then we do it again." I swallowed hard. Children should rehearse school plays, not happiness. My former mother-in-law, Carol, called me every Sunday afternoon. She never criticized her son directly. She loved him too much for that. But she loved her granddaughter enough to tell me the truth. I'm worried about Lily. What happened? Vanessa's trying very hard to create the perfect wedding. I figured. Carol hesitated. I don't think anyone remembers there's a little girl involved. She explained that every Saturday had become another wedding activity. Dress fittings, hair appointments, photo rehearsals, cake tastings, venue visits. Lily sat quietly through them all. Does she complain? No. Does she cry? Not in front of anyone. Then what? Carol's voice cracked. She stopped asking questions. That frightened me more than tears ever could. Children ask questions because they trust the world. When they stop asking, they're usually trying to survive it. One evening, Ethan came home from school carrying a drawing. He had drawn our family. There were 4 stick figures. Me, him, Lily. Then off to the side, another figure. Who's that? I asked. He looked confused. Dad. Why is he standing over there? He shrugged. I don't know. Children often reveal truths without realizing it. I pinned the drawing on our refrigerator. Every morning it reminded me that my son understood our family better than many adults did. The wedding plans became impossible to ignore. Daniel posted pictures online almost every week. Wine tastings, the vineyard, customized invitations, designer tuxedos, professional engagement photos. Friends left comments like, "You two are perfect together. So happy you finally found your soulmate." Every cheerful sentence felt like another chapter erased from the 20 years we had shared. I wasn't jealous anymore. That emotion had burned itself out months earlier. What hurt was seeing strangers celebrate a story that had begun with so much dishonesty. Lily's calls became shorter, sometimes only 3 or 4 minutes. One afternoon she whispered, "Mommy." Yes, I heard something. What did you hear? She lowered her voice even more. Daddy's friend said you lost. I felt my chest tighten. What do you think that means? I don't know. Another pause. Did somebody win? I closed my eyes. No, sweetheart. But she said Daddy won. Sometimes grown-ups say things that aren't very kind. Did you lose me? That question stole every ounce of air from my lungs. No. Promise. I promise. She smiled, a real smile this time. I believe you. A week later, Carol invited Lily over for homemade cookies. While the dough baked, Lily wandered into the guest bedroom where old family photo albums were stored. Carol later told me she found Lily sitting on the floor surrounded by pictures. There was one from Yellowstone, another from Ethan's first birthday, Christmas morning, our 20th anniversary trip. Lily touched each picture carefully. Were Mommy and Daddy happy? Carol answered honestly. Yes. What happened? Carol didn't know how to explain affairs, divorce, or broken trust to a first grader, so she simply said, "Sometimes adults make mistakes." Lily nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "Can mistakes make people forget they love you?" Carol burst into tears after telling me that story. Not long afterward, my sister flew to Seattle for work and managed to spend an afternoon with Lily. When she called me afterward, she sounded troubled. "Emma, Lily barely talks." "What do you mean?" "She answers when spoken to, but that's it." "Anything else?" "She apologizes constantly." "For what?" "For everything." My sister imitated her gently. "I'm sorry I walked too slow. I'm sorry I spilled water. I'm sorry I asked a question. Emma, 6-year-olds aren't supposed to apologize for existing." That night I barely slept. I considered booking the first flight back to America. I even opened the airline website. Then reality returned. If I suddenly appeared demanding changes, I could violate the custody agreement. Daniel's attorney would almost certainly use it against me. The cruelest part of custody arrangements is that sometimes doing the right thing feels like doing nothing. 2 weeks before the wedding, Lily called while sitting beneath the big maple tree in Daniel's backyard. "I wrote you something." "You did?" She nodded, but I didn't mail it. "Would you read it to me?" She unfolded a wrinkled sheet of notebook paper. The handwriting wandered across the page in large, uneven letters. She read slowly. "Dear Mommy." She stopped to sound out a word. Everybody smiles except me. I bit my lip. I try really hard. Another pause. "I don't want Daddy to be mad." She looked up. "I love Daddy." "I know you do." "I love you too." "I know that too." She folded the paper. "I'm going to keep it." "Why? So when I see you again I can give it to you." "I'll treasure it forever." She smiled faintly. "I knew you would." The night before the rehearsal dinner, Carol tucked Lily into bed. As she turned off the lamp, Lily spoke into the darkness. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart?" "If someone promises forever." Carol waited. "Why do they forget?" There are questions no grandparent, no parent, and no judge can answer well. Carol simply climbed into bed beside her granddaughter and held her until she fell asleep. The next morning, the wedding weekend officially began. None of us knew that the smallest person in the family was about to become the bravest. The morning of Daniel's wedding began like any other Saturday for me. Singapore was already warm by 7 o'clock. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Ethan and I shared pancakes before his weekend soccer practice. If I had known what was about to happen halfway across the world, I don't think I could have swallowed a single bite. Instead, I kissed Ethan on the forehead, packed his water bottle, and reminded him to wear sunscreen. Life has a strange way of moving forward even when another chapter is quietly preparing to fall apart. Before leaving for practice, Ethan stopped at the refrigerator and looked at the drawing he had made weeks earlier. The 4 stick figures were still there. "Dad's getting married today," he said softly. "Yes. Do you think Lily's scared?" Children often ask the questions adults avoid. "I think she's probably nervous." "I wish I could be there." "So do I." He wrapped his arms around me without saying another word. Sometimes an 8-year-old hug can hold together a mother who's barely keeping herself together. Back in California, Carol later told me the vineyard looked like something from a magazine. The ceremony was held on a gentle hillside, overlooking rows of grapevines stretching toward the distant mountains. The weather was perfect. A cool breeze carried the scent of lavender and fresh-cut grass. White roses lined the aisle. Crystal chandeliers hung beneath a beautifully decorated reception tent. Every table was arranged with expensive china-polished silverware and handwritten place cards. Daniel had spared no expense. To anyone arriving that afternoon, it looked like the beginning of a fairy tale. Only a handful of people knew how the story had really begun. Lily arrived early with Carol. She wore a white satin flower girl dress covered in tiny embroidered blossoms. A ribbon rested gently in her brown hair. Little white shoes completed the outfit. The shoes that hurt. Carol told me Lily looked beautiful. Then she quietly added something that mattered far more. She never smiled, not once. While the hairstylist adjusted curls around Lily's face, Vanessa walked into the bridal suite wearing a silk robe embroidered with the words "bride" across the back. She glanced at Lily. "Sweetie, remember what we practiced?" Lily nodded. Shoulders back. Another nod. "And keep smiling." "Okay." Vanessa smiled with satisfaction before turning back toward her bridesmaids. To her, Lily wasn't a grieving little girl. She was another detail that needed to be perfect. Daniel found Lily standing alone outside a few minutes later. "There's my princess." She looked up politely. "Hi, Daddy." "You excited?" "I guess." He gently adjusted the ribbon in her hair. "You know how important today is." "Yes." "I need you to help make everything beautiful." She looked toward the chapel. "Will Mommy ever come here?" Daniel hesitated. "No." "Oh." That single word carried more disappointment than 1,000 tears. Daniel checked his watch. "We should get inside." He never noticed the way Lily glanced back toward the parking lot as though hoping another car might suddenly appear. Around noon, Carol sent me a simple text message. "Everything's beginning." I stared at those 2 words for a long time. Then I answered. "Please stay close to Lily." Her reply came almost immediately. "I promise." It was a promise she intended to keep. Guests filled the wooden chairs one conversation at a time. Friends from Daniel's company laughed over glasses of champagne. Several relatives I hadn't seen since the divorce greeted one another warmly. Most avoided mentioning me. It was easier that way. A string quartet began playing soft classical music. Photographers moved quietly through the crowd, capturing smiles from every angle. The atmosphere was polished, elegant, almost rehearsed. One of Daniel's co-workers leaned toward another guest and whispered, "They really are starting fresh." Carol overheard him. She wanted to answer. Instead, she looked at Lily. Children don't get fresh starts. They carry every goodbye with them. When the ceremony finally began, everyone stood. The bridesmaids walked slowly down the aisle. Each step was perfectly timed. Then came Lily. She held a small basket of white rose petals with both hands. She walked exactly the way she had practiced, one careful step after another. Her shoulders remained straight. Her smile stayed in place. Every guest admired how composed she looked. No one realized that composure and happiness are not the same thing. Carol later admitted she almost cried watching Lily, not because the little girl looked beautiful, because she looked determined. There is a heartbreaking difference. Daniel stood at the altar wearing a tailored navy tuxedo. Vanessa appeared moments later on her father's arm. Guests smiled. Someone quietly wiped away happy tears. The officiant welcomed everyone and spoke about love commitment and beginning a new chapter. As Carol listened, she found herself thinking about another chapter that had never truly been closed. Not in Lily's heart. Halfway through the ceremony, my phone rang. It was Carol. I smiled automatically, expecting perhaps a quick update or a picture of Lily. Instead, the call disconnected before I answered. A few seconds later, another call came. Again, it ended. I assumed the signal was weak. I sent a text. "Everything okay?" There was no response. I tried to focus on helping Ethan organize his baseball cards across the living room floor, but an uneasy feeling settled over me. Mothers know that feeling. It arrives without evidence, without explanation. Simply a quiet voice that whispers something isn't right. At the vineyard, the ceremony continued. Daniel repeated his vows confidently. Vanessa smiled through tears. The guests applauded softly after each heartfelt promise. Then the officiant invited everyone to bow their heads for a brief blessing. Lily stood beside the first row, exactly where she'd been instructed. Hands folded, eyes lowered, silent. The officiant lifted his head again and smiled warmly. "We've celebrated love, commitment, and family today." He paused before speaking the familiar words. "If anyone here has any lawful reason these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." Most guests smiled politely. Everyone expected the usual silence. Instead, a tiny hand rose into the air. At first, several people laughed. One uncle chuckled under his breath. A bridesmaid smiled, assuming Lily had become distracted. The officiant himself looked pleasantly surprised. "Yes, sweetheart," he asked kindly. Daniel's smile disappeared. "Lily," he whispered through clenched teeth, "put your hand down." She didn't move. Her little arm remained raised. Steady, determined. The officiant looked uncertain. "Honey, did you need something?" Lily nodded. "I do." Daniel stepped toward her. "We talked about this." She looked directly at him. "I know." His voice became firmer. "This isn't the time." She took one slow breath, then another. The chapel grew so quiet that guests could hear the breeze rustling the vineyard leaves outside. Phones slowly appeared in people's hands. Not because they expected drama, because they sensed history. The officiant glanced uncertainly between Daniel and the little girl. "Would you like to say something?" Lily nodded once. "Yes." She looked first at the officiant, then at Vanessa. Finally, she looked straight into her father's eyes, and she opened her mouth to speak. When Carol described the silence to me later, she said it didn't feel like the quiet before an argument. It felt like the quiet before a truth no one was prepared to hear. Lily stood in the middle of the aisle, still wearing the little white dress everyone had admired only minutes earlier. Her flower basket rested on the floor beside her. Her small hands were folded together. Daniel took one cautious step toward her. "Lily," he said softly, forcing a smile, "let's talk after the ceremony." She shook her head. "I need to say it now." The officiant looked uncertain. He had performed hundreds of weddings, but I doubt any of them had prepared him for a 6-year-old asking to speak. He glanced at Daniel. Daniel looked embarrassed. Vanessa looked frightened. The officiant finally nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Lily took a slow breath. Then she spoke so quietly that everyone leaned forward to hear her. "Daddy," Daniel closed his eyes. "You told Mommy that promises last forever." No one moved. No one even coughed. Lily continued. "You told me families don't throw people away." Another pause. Then came the sentence that Carol said seemed to stop time itself. "If this wedding starts with broken promises..." She looked at Vanessa. "How will this marriage be different?" No accusation. No anger. Just one honest question from a child who still believed questions deserved answers. The silence stretched for several long seconds. Daniel stared at his daughter as though he no longer recognized the little girl standing before him. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again. The officiant lowered his Bible. One bridesmaid quietly wiped away tears. A guest in the third row looked down at the ground. No one knew where to look, because no one wanted to look directly at the truth. Daniel finally knelt in front of Lily. "Honey?" His voice sounded different, less confident. Adults sometimes make complicated decisions. Lily tilted her head. Were they too complicated to tell the truth? Daniel had spent months preparing for this wedding. He had practiced vows, chosen music, selected flowers, reserved photographers. Yet nothing had prepared him for answering that question. He couldn't. Not because there wasn't an explanation. Because there wasn't an honest one. Vanessa stepped forward carefully. "Lily, sweetheart." The little girl looked at her politely. "I know you love your daddy." I do. And I hope someday you'll love me too. Lily answered with the simple honesty only children possess. I don't know you enough, Vanessa blinked. I'd like us to become a family. Lily looked confused. I already have a family. Nobody breathed. Carol later told me that was the moment several guests quietly lowered their eyes. Not because Lily had been disrespectful, because she had reminded everyone that divorce changes legal relationships overnight. Children don't change their hearts that quickly. Daniel's father, Richard, slowly stood from the front row. He had remained silent throughout the divorce. Like many men of his generation, he believed family conflicts should stay private. But this moment was different. He walked toward his granddaughter. Not toward Daniel. Toward Lily. He gently picked up her flower basket and handed it back to her. You did nothing wrong. She looked up. I didn't. No, I wasn't trying to be bad. I know. She searched his face. I just wanted somebody to answer. Richard nodded slowly. So did the rest of us. The officiant quietly stepped aside. There is no rush, he said. We can take a few minutes. No one objected. Guests began whispering among themselves. Some slipped outside onto the vineyard patio. Others remained seated in thoughtful silence. The perfect wedding schedule dissolved without anyone mentioning it. For the first time that day, appearances no longer mattered. Reality did. Half an hour later, Daniel asked his parents if they could take Lily for a walk. Carol held one of Lily's hands. Richard held the other. Together, they wandered through the vineyard. Lily looked up at her grandmother. Is Daddy mad? Carol answered honestly. I think your daddy is hurting. Because of me? No. Then why? Carol stopped walking. She knelt beside her granddaughter. Because sometimes the truth hurts more than lies. Lily considered that carefully. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I know. I love Daddy. Carol smiled sadly. I've never doubted that. Back near the chapel, Daniel and Vanessa sat alone. Most guests politely gave them space. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. I never imagined. Vanessa finished the sentence for him. That a child would say what every adult was thinking. He looked at her. You think that's true? She didn't answer immediately. Finally, she whispered, I think people have been pretending not to notice how quickly all of this happened. Daniel leaned back in his chair. For the first time since our divorce, someone wasn't defending his decisions. Not even the woman he was about to marry. Meanwhile, my phone rang again. This time it was Carol. Her voice trembled. Emma, what happened? Lily spoke during the ceremony. My heart stopped. Is she okay? Yes. What did she say? Carol repeated every word as best she could. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. Tears filled my eyes before she reached the end. Not because Lily had embarrassed anyone. Because she had carried a burden no 6-year-old should ever have been asked to carry. When Carol finished, neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I whispered, How is she? Carol's answer broke my heart. She keeps asking whether she ruined the wedding. The ceremony eventually resumed. Not because anyone felt the same, but because life rarely gives us the option of starting the day over. The officiant asked Daniel and Vanessa one final time if they wished to continue. Both quietly answered yes. Their voices no longer carried excitement, only certainty that turning back would create even greater pain. The vows were exchanged. The rings were placed. The guests applauded politely. But the celebration that followed never found its rhythm. Conversations remained subdued. Music played, yet few people danced. Even the photographers later admitted the smiles looked forced. No expensive decoration could erase what everyone had witnessed. Late that evening, after most guests had gone home, Daniel carried a sleeping Lily upstairs at his parents' house. As he laid her gently on the bed, something slipped from her arms. An old family photograph. It showed the 4 of us years earlier at Mount Rainier. I was laughing. Daniel was holding Ethan on his shoulders. Little Lily sat in my lap grinning with missing front teeth. The picture had been taken before secrets, before lawyers, before custody agreements. Daniel picked it up carefully. On the back, written in Lily's uneven handwriting, were 6 simple words. My first family, I love them all. For the first time in many years, my ex-husband cried without trying to hide it. He finally understood that children don't measure families by wedding dates or divorce decrees. They measure them by love. And love remembers everything. People imagine that justice arrives like lightning. A dramatic courtroom victory. A public apology. A fortune lost overnight. Life rarely works that way. Real consequences usually arrive quietly. One ordinary morning at a time. The morning after the wedding, Daniel called me. I almost didn't answer. We had spoken only when it involved the children, and even those conversations had become brief and businesslike. When I heard his voice, I noticed something immediately. The confidence was gone. "Emma, is Lily okay?" "She's fine." I waited. He had never called just to tell me everything was fine. After a long silence, he finally said, "I'm sorry." Those 2 words would have meant everything years earlier. Now they sounded like the beginning of a conversation instead of the end of one. "I don't know exactly what I'm apologizing for anymore," he admitted. "Maybe for all of it." I closed my eyes. "I'm glad you called. I don't expect forgiveness. I wasn't offering it." Another silence settled between us. Then he quietly asked, "Would you talk to Lily?" "Of course." When Lily came on the phone, her little voice sounded uncertain. "Mommy?" "I'm here, sweetheart. Grandma said everybody's talking about me." I chose my words carefully. "They're talking because you were honest." "Was I bad?" "No, I didn't yell." "I know. I wasn't trying to stop the wedding." "I know that too." She sighed softly. "I just wanted Daddy to answer." My throat tightened. "I think someday he'll understand that." "I hope so." "So do I." The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. No dramatic family arguments. No angry social media posts. Just small changes that slowly became impossible to ignore. Daniel stopped posting photographs online. The endless stream of cheerful updates disappeared. Friends who had once congratulated him now simply asked how Lily was doing. That question followed him everywhere. Not because people wanted gossip, because the little girl at the wedding had reminded them of their own children and grandchildren. Many of them had lived through divorce themselves. They knew the hidden cost. Carol continued calling me every Sunday. One afternoon, she sounded cautiously hopeful. Daniel canceled 2 business trips. "Really?" He said Lily needed him. "That's new." "It is." She laughed gently. "You know what he did yesterday?" "What?" "He spent 3 hours helping Lily build a birdhouse." I smiled despite myself. "How did it turn out?" Carol chuckled. "It leans to one side. Lily probably loves it." "She does." Sometimes healing begins with something as ordinary as crooked wood and spilled glue. Daniel also started doing something he had never done during our marriage. He listened. Not perfectly, not every time, but he tried. Carol told me that one evening Lily climbed into the living room chair beside him while he was reading. "Daddy." "Yes." "Can I ask something?" "You can ask me anything." She looked at him carefully as though testing whether he meant it. "Were you happier before?" Daniel set the book down. "What do you mean?" "When Mommy lived here." He didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, "Some things were happier." "Then why didn't you fix them?" He rubbed his forehead. "I should have tried harder." Lily nodded. "I think so too." Children have a remarkable way of ending conversations once they've found the truth they were looking for. Meanwhile, life in Singapore settled into a steady rhythm. Ethan's health continued improving. His asthma attacks became less frequent. His teachers often told me how much more confident he seemed. Still, every evening he counted the weeks until summer. "That's when Lily comes, right? If everything goes as planned." He smiled. "I'm going to show her my favorite park. And your new school? Everything." He paused. "I don't want her to think I forgot her." "You never could." He looked relieved. "I know." About 3 months after the wedding, Daniel surprised me again. He asked if we could have a video meeting, not about schedules or paperwork, but simply to talk. When the screen connected, I barely recognized him. He looked tired. Older. Not physically. Emotionally. "I've been seeing a family counselor." I nodded. "That's good." I thought counseling would tell me how everyone else needed to change. A sad smile crossed his face. "Turns out I was the one who had homework." I almost laughed. Almost. The counselor asked me to watch old family videos. "How was that?" I couldn't finish the first one. "Why?" "Because every memory I thought belonged to me. You were carrying most of it." He looked away from the camera. "Birthday parties." I stayed silent. "You were always the one decorating." Another pause. "Christmas mornings." Still, I said nothing. "You stayed up half the night wrapping presents." His voice grew quieter. "I used to think those things just happened." "They never just happened." "I know." For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't defending himself. He was discovering himself. Not every change was easy. His marriage to Vanessa quickly showed cracks. Carol never spoke cruelly about her. She simply described what she observed. "They don't seem happy." "Do they argue?" "Not loudly." "What then?" "They avoid each other." Apparently, once the excitement of the wedding disappeared, ordinary life arrived. And ordinary life has a habit of exposing relationships built on excitement instead of trust. Vanessa struggled with the reality of becoming a stepmother. Daniel struggled with the guilt he could no longer ignore. Neither problem had anything to do with Lily's words. Her words had simply uncovered truths that were already there. One evening, my phone rang again. "Daniel, I'd like to ask something." "I'm listening." "I want Lily to spend the summer with you and Ethan." I stared at the phone. "What changed?" He answered honestly. "I finally understand something." "What?" "She shouldn't have to choose which parent she's allowed to miss." Tears filled my eyes. That was the first decision he had made entirely for Lily. Not for appearances, not for convenience. For her. I'd like that very much. So would she. The day finally arrived. I stood inside Singapore Changi Airport with Ethan watching passengers stream through the arrival gates. Ethan bounced nervously beside me. "There!" Before I even saw her, I heard him shout. "Lily." She came running through the crowd wearing a small backpack almost as big as she was. Ethan met her halfway. The two of them wrapped their arms around each other with the kind of joy only children can express without embarrassment. I walked toward them slowly. Lily looked up. "Mommy?" I knelt. She threw herself into my arms. For a long time, none of us spoke. There are reunions that don't need words. As I held my daughter, I noticed something I hadn't seen in months. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her laughter came easily. The careful smile she had practiced for the wedding was gone. This smile belonged entirely to her. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep in the same bedroom talking and giggling until exhaustion finally won, I stepped onto the apartment balcony. My phone buzzed. A new email from Daniel. There was no legal language. No requests. No explanations. Just a scanned handwritten letter. It began with one sentence. "Dear Lily, I'm learning that being your father means listening even when the truth hurts." For the first time since our marriage had ended, I believed that change might actually be possible. Not because anyone had won, but because one little girl had finally been heard. A year passed more quickly than I expected. Age has a funny way of changing how we measure time. When we're young, a year feels endless. By the time we've raised children and watched them become adults, a year can disappear between one Christmas card and the next. For our family, that year didn't erase the past. It simply gave us enough distance to see it more clearly. The biggest surprise wasn't that Daniel had changed. It was that he kept changing. Not because anyone was watching, not because he wanted praise, but because he finally understood that trust isn't rebuilt with grand speeches. It's rebuilt one ordinary day at a time. The first thing he did was simplify his life. He turned down a promotion that would have required constant travel. Years earlier, he would have accepted it without hesitation. This time he didn't. Carol later told me he said something that made her cry. "I've already missed too much of my children's childhood. I'm not missing what's left." That sentence couldn't give Ethan back the birthdays his father had skipped. It couldn't erase Lily's lonely nights, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are enough. Not long after Daniel and Vanessa quietly separated. There was no dramatic scandal, no public accusations, no ugly court battle. They simply reached the painful conclusion that the relationship they'd fought so hard to protect had never been strong enough to survive ordinary life. One afternoon, Vanessa surprised me by asking if we could talk. At first, I almost refused. Then I remembered something my own mother used to say. Listening doesn't mean agreeing, it simply means leaving room for truth. We met at a small coffee shop while I was visiting Seattle. She looked different, less polished, more human. "I owe you an apology," she said before we had even ordered our coffee. I didn't interrupt. I spent so much time trying to become part of Lily's life that I never stopped to understand what she'd lost. Her eyes filled with tears. I thought if everything looked perfect, eventually it would feel perfect. It doesn't work that way. No, she shook her head. It never did. We talked for nearly an hour. Not as rivals, not as friends. Just as two women who had both learned that appearances are poor foundations for families. When we stood to leave, she smiled gently. "I hope Lily remembers me as someone who eventually learned." I think she will. Children are often more forgiving than adults. That summer, we celebrated Lily's 7th birthday together. Not under one roof, but in one park. Daniel grilled hamburgers. I brought Lily's favorite homemade chocolate cake. Carol and Richard organized games for the grandchildren. Ethan spent most of the afternoon helping Lily fly a bright yellow kite. At one point, I looked around and realized something remarkable. No one was pretending. No one was forcing smiles. No one was trying to create the perfect family photograph. We were simply doing the best we could. Oddly enough, that looked far more beautiful than perfection ever had. Later that afternoon, Lily tugged gently on Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart?" She held out a drawing. It showed our family again. Only this one looked different from Ethan's old picture. There were still 4 people. But instead of standing inside one house, we stood beside 2 smaller houses connected by a winding path. Daniel studied the picture. "Tell me about it." Lily smiled. "This is your house," she pointed. "And this is Mommy's." "What about the path?" "So we can visit." Daniel swallowed hard. "I like that." She looked up at him. "You don't have to live together to be nice." "No." "You just have to tell the truth." He nodded slowly. "I wish I'd learned that sooner." "So do I." Then without another word, she wrapped her little arms around his waist. Daniel held her tightly. I looked away for a moment, giving them the privacy they deserved. Some hugs are conversations. That autumn, Lily performed in her elementary school's music program. Parents filled the auditorium. Children sang songs about changing seasons, friendship, and hope. Nothing extraordinary happened. No dramatic speeches, no unexpected surprises, yet it became one of my favorite memories. After the performance, Lily spotted Daniel waiting near the stage. She ran over. "Daddy." "You were wonderful." She smiled. "Really, the best singer there." She giggled. "I forgot one word." "I don't think anyone noticed." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Are you proud of me?" Daniel knelt until they were eye to eye. His answer came without hesitation. "I've always loved you." He gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "But now I'm finally learning how to show it." Lily kissed his cheek. "I like this version better." He laughed through tears. "So do I." As for Ethan, he grew stronger every month. His asthma remained under control, and he discovered a love for science. One evening, he told me he wanted to become an engineer. "Why?" He grinned. "So I can fix things." I smiled. "Machines." He thought for a moment. "And maybe families." Children have a way of saying in one sentence what adults spend years trying to explain. People sometimes ask whether I ever felt revenge. I tell them the truth. At first, I thought revenge meant watching Daniel lose everything. His reputation, his marriage, his happiness. I was wrong. Real revenge wasn't seeing him suffer. It was watching him become the father our children had needed all along. Because that gift didn't belong to him. It belonged to Ethan. It belonged to Lily. And in a quiet way, it belonged to me too. The greatest victory wasn't proving I had been right. It was proving that bitterness didn't have to become our children's inheritance. I learned that divorce ends a marriage. It does not end the responsibility to protect a child's heart. Children remember far less about who won the arguments than they do about who made them feel safe. Looking back, I often think about that little girl in the white flower dress standing alone in front of a room full of adults. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. She wasn't seeking attention. She simply believed that promises should mean something. Perhaps that's why her words carried so much power. They reminded every one of us that truth sounds different when it comes from a child. Simple, honest, impossible to ignore. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll take a moment to share it with someone who may need the reminder that children are always listening, even when we think they're too young to understand. And if stories about family forgiveness and finding hope after heartbreak speak to you, I'd be honored if you joined me again for another journey. Thank you for spending your time with me. Take good care of the people you love. They're listening more closely than you know.